Absolutely.
Certainly on deferred maintenance.
Yep.
Wastewater, water being our highest priority. But thank you for your team, and please express your rank and file that's out there, many during the storm, providing public service. Thank you. I think we've all emphasized nothing's more important than energy, electricity. Brad, Tuton John, would you come and give us a status report? Obviously, you can discuss the preparation and where we are today and where we're going forward from a CenterPoint standpoint.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council, for the opportunity to share our experience here at CenterPoint Energy. We do recognize the challenges that we face when our community is without power, and it is our purpose to be able to enable all of our customers the quality of life necessary to be able to do that, so we take that seriously. And because of that, we are committed to do everything that we can to make sure we get the lights on as quickly and as swiftly and safely as possible. And what I can share with you with that commitment starts with preparation. It is imperative to understand when it comes to our preparation, we start in April. We are able to execute our tabletop exercises. We work and secure our logistics, our third-party vendors to make sure they're able to respond. We're making sure that we can get the necessary materials, the pipelines to be able to get the inventory necessary to be delivered and responded appropriately. Coming in right at the beginning of June, we begin our in-the-field exercises where we do hands-on training with our employees so they know not only what their responsibilities are, but they know exactly what they need to be, where they need to be, and how they need to be able to do what they need to do. So that being said, we're constantly watching the weather. We were watching this storm as soon as it entered the Gulf, and despite the fact that all reports were indicating that it was not going to come here, we were doing everything to try to prepare ahead of time. We actually start with our emergency operations plan 72 hours ahead of time. Then we have other things that we start moving 36 hours and then 24 hours worth of that. And that includes making sure all of our resources are available. We make sure all our third-party vendors are prepared. We make sure that we start gathering all the materials that are necessary to be able to respond. And then we start evaluating what our resources are going to be in addition to what is necessary prior to that storm. So I can tell you, before the storm ever came, 24 hours, I was personally at the Office of the Emergency Management with their briefings before the storm came, explaining exactly what our preparation was, how we were prepared, everything that we were doing responding, and including the amount of resources that we already had en route to our region. Now, keep in mind, typically, when you're looking at the industry response, the weather is unpredictable. It's hard to know exactly how many resources you need. And so the way that's usually generated is that once the storm goes through, you assess the damage, you figure out what your needs are, and then you go out and you ask for that support with mutual assistance. So you're looking at municipalities, other utilities from across the country to come and respond. We were proactive in the sense of doing that even before the storm came. And we're asking them if they could send us, stop doing everything that you're doing regarding what issues that you're working on in your territory, your region, if you could come here as quickly as possible. Now understand, there's been some questions about whether or not they rode out the storm while they were here. And I can tell you that part of the reason why we are so good at the work that we do on restoring the energy that we do is not only because of the work we've done here, but we send our crews in mutual assistance doing exactly what the crews are doing here all across the country. We've sent our crews to Florida, Louisiana, Mississippi. Even during Hurricane Sandy up in New York, we were there. And I can tell you that being able to do that is imperative to not only understand what it takes to be able to do the restoration effort, But it's also important to realize when we show up, it's usually typically day 2, sometimes day 3. So if you look at a storm that rolls early in the morning, day 0 is when the storm hits. We have to go out with all our resources, boots on the ground, start assessing what we have. While that's taking place, we begin mobilizing our staging sites and looking for our crews to respond on day 1 so they could be boots on the ground day 2. So I want to put that in comparative to this storm here. One of the issues that we had specifically is that this storm didn't completely leave our territory until 3 p.m. Once that storm rolled through, we deployed our resources. The outside crews that were coming in, we do not ask them to ride out the storm. Just as I had mentioned, when we respond to other storms in other areas, it is not safe to bring in additional crews to ride out during a storm. People evacuate during hurricanes. We have to make sure they have facilities. These are thousands of field resources that are sitting in nothing but a truck. We cannot ask them to ride out a storm, which is a hurricane. As we've seen, trees are falling on homes, buildings are being damaged. What we ask is to get here as close as possible. When that storm goes through, immediately respond. And that gives us the time necessary to set up our staging facilities. So when we're looking at this specific storm, 2.26 million customers. CenterPoint has been providing electricity to this community for over 100 years. We have never seen an incident to this magnitude. This is the largest outage in our history. And with that being said, we've committed within 48 hours to get 50% of our customers back on. We are on target to do that. And to help give you another idea of what we're looking at as far as our preparation efforts. September 21, Hurricane Nicholas. We were able to go through and observe that hurricane that hit us directly. 700 approximately plus customers were without power during that storm. That took us 5 days to get them back on. Within 24 hours of this storm, we had 750,000 customers back on within 24 hours. We could not do that if we were not prepared. One of the things that I observed, and I've been with CenterPoint Energy for 26 years now. I've worked in this region, Southeast Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi. I've responded to quite a few number of hurricanes, and not just ours, but other utilities as well. And I can tell you the amount of work to set up and prepare is monumental. And in looking at what it takes to set up a staging site, for example, when these thousands of crews come in and you have to be able to respond, you have to make sure that you have the facilities, the food, the catering, everything necessary that takes place. And what I'm talking about is, first of all, a parking lot for hundreds of vehicles. We're building circus-sized tents for a mess hall to serve hundreds of people in one sitting. You got tents, you got tables. We have to have complete infrastructure. We're talking about offices, desks, computers, printers, copiers. We have to set up communications, get the Wi-Fi up. We're setting up radio towers. We got backup generation trying to support all of these things. We have hundreds of poles. We have to have an efficient laydown yard with 50-foot, 60-foot plus poles so that our crews, when they're able to roll out, can get the tools necessary. We have to have all the resources available to manage the inventory, to manage the workload, to train, to be able to get these crews acclimated to our facilities, understand what our safety protocols are. And so for us to do that takes time. Again, I cannot reiterate in my 26 years experience to have 8 staging sites set up and within 14 hours has never been done before. It is incredible to realize that after the storm left at 3 p.m., all of our boots were out on the ground, our restoration process began. All of that was in process. And by 5 a.m., after the crews were arriving the evening of the night of the storm, we were able to have complete staging sites up and ready for them to get all the materials they need. They were fed, they were given work, and they were dispatched out on the field. And that is how we were able to, as we committed to the mayor, to get 50% of our customers on within 48 hours. To us, that benchmark is 3 p.m. today, and we're almost there now. As far as getting an idea of what the outlook as far as the damage, we're still doing assessments. For us to be able to do that, we can give you an exact idea of what our circuits that are out. We can give you the number of customers that are out, but we can't tell you specifically how much those circuits are damaged. There's only one way to do that, unfortunately, and that's boots on the ground. To give you an idea of what we're looking at CenterPoint Energy, we're 5,000 square miles and 56,000 miles of circuits that have to be walked. So if you can imagine, starting first thing in the morning, we have resources walking every circuit that we have to verify what we have, and we'll have that information complete, hopefully by the end of today. Once we get that information, we'll be able to assess exactly what we have and be able to get an idea of what we're looking at as far as the time frame. But until that happens, we don't really know exactly, and we can't give you a confirmation on what it is because we still have to verify that. But in the meantime, while that's being done, we have thousands of line resources out getting the power back on, and we're committed to continue doing that.
Thank you. Councilman Pollard.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for your commitment, and to all of the CenterPoint employees and vendors for your efforts. You started off by saying that commitment starts with preparation.
Correct.
And to be prepared for something that you don't anticipate is difficult.
Agreed.
But in the fourth largest city in America, we have to be prepared even when we don't anticipate. And my question to you is, if we were to anticipate what the amount of outage that we've experienced and the devastation that has occurred, would there have been more resources available from a CenterPoint perspective beforehand? Would crews have been able to be mobilized quicker? And is there any plan to have more internal or on-site within the city crews trained and prepared, since these storms are occurring more frequently and the outages are starting to be much greater than have been in the past?
Yes, so there's quite a few there. As far as our response and preparation, we were fully prepared. We were proactive in that preparation, and like I said, it's a gamble. You don't know exactly what the weather's going to foretell. For example, when we had Hurricane Nicholas, we knew that was going to be a direct hit, but it was not as impactful as this storm was. But regardless of that, we went ahead and called resources anyway. Even knowing with the risk that we might not have had a direct hit, we might not have been impacted, we made the call to go ahead and get resources. Now, again, it's based on the information that we had at the time, but part of our preparation process is to continue monitor. We have to be able to adapt, we have to be able to improvise, and we have to be able to react. And so we called in what we thought would be a good amount of resources, but as the storm was going through and we're realizing that it's hitting us more directly, we called more. And after our boots are on the ground, we're getting reports of the damage that we're seeing. I think we got an additional 2,000. Now, the question was, did we get enough on the first call? What I would tell you is that the second call that we had, those folks were already coming in the same day. It's not going to get you any quicker results with the 10,000 secured resources that we had. And these people are coming from all over the country. They can't all necessarily, if you're driving here from Massachusetts, for example, it takes time to get here. So Yeah, we did secure the resources. We did feel that we need to secure more. But again, I can assure you that is an effort to be proactive and an effort to try to get the restoration efforts as quickly as possible.
Is there anything that we can do going forward from a CenterPoint standpoint when it comes to mobilizing crews to have more local crews in preparation? Because if we have to wait for people to drive from Massachusetts and then get here and then go to the tent, eat, and then get out there, I mean, that's going to take some time. And these storms are happening much more frequently. And the calls and the emails that we get in our offices, sure you're getting, your offices are getting the same. These are heartbreaking calls from seniors, those with little means, with kids, with elderly parents, and they don't understand why the power is not being restored. And there has to be something that can be done, or a learning lesson from how frequently and hard these storms are hitting us, to be able to react and respond quicker and not have to rely on people coming from all over the country. Because if we stay that route, then lives will be lost, our economy goes down, and as the fourth largest city in America, which is the energy capital of the world, there has to be something that we can learn from this to have quicker and faster response times, and something that we can take to the state to say, hey, this is needed for the city of Houston. We cannot have the fourth largest city impacted in this way on a consistent basis. And so are there things that you all are looking at now to say, based on what we've experienced, we have to kind of change our model in any way?
Yes, and thank you, Councilmember Pollard. We 100% agree. The world is different. As Councilmember Shabazz has mentioned, the storms are more frequent, they're more severe, and our paradigm on how we look at things has to change. And because of that, I would say that our legislators have felt that way when they passed some legislation on our resiliency this past summer. The Texas Public Utility Commission passed a ruling asking the utility companies to evaluate our infrastructure and see what we could do to address the very issue that you have asked. So this past April, we've done a robust study in what we're looking at, and we filed a resiliency plan before the Texas Public Utility Commission with all the things that we do feel are necessary to be able to survive that punch. We can never completely withstand a hurricane without an outage, but there are a lot of things that we could look at doing differently. Councilmember Martinez, you mentioned the vegetation management. Part of that program is tens of millions of dollars to go and invest in more vegetation management specifically for resiliency. That change in that paradigm is because the world that we live in is always based on a reliability response, but not a resiliency piece. And we recognize with the changing climate, the amount of storms that we've had, that needs to change. Several years ago, we changed our engineering design standards. We've been doing a lot to make our system more resilient. But with those 56,000 miles of circuits that we're talking about, we have tens of decades old facilities that need to be upgraded that aren't to these new wind standards. There are things that we could do to modernize our grid. I'll give you an example. Some of the intelligent grid things that we had, we observed that we were able to save 175,000 customers with this storm just because of the modern infrastructure that we've been able to put in place so far. We need more of that. So, yes, we agree, we support, and we would ask you for your support for our resiliency filing that we have because we feel that that is the best thing. I use the analogy of the auto industry. The old paradigm that we lived in was the reliability with your car. You want it to be reliable. That reliability means that when you're taking your kids to the soccer game or you're going to the grocery store, that car is always there, it's available. And that's the world that we lived in. Now we have to start talking about the resiliency. And what does that mean? That means things that don't necessarily equate to the reliability piece, but means that you can recover from an incident like airbags, seat belts, the things that help you walk away better from a collision You're not going to be able to prevent the collision, but you can make it safer for everybody moving forward. And that's what we're talking about here. So yes, we have before the Public Utility Commission, our resiliency filing to do exactly the things that you're talking about.
Thank you for your accountability.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Kamen.
Thank you. And first and foremost, I want to thank you and Jake for working with all of our offices as we are escalating critical locations with vulnerable populations, critical services, et cetera. Y'all have been in OEM working with us, and I know that those hours have been very long. And I also want to recognize the hard work of line crews that are coming in. It's brutal heat. Our residents are experiencing it. During the derecho, I was out, handing out waters to thank them. So I think for all Houstonians, we are appreciative of their work right now to restore power. And my questions are not, you're in the hot seat right now.
Understood.
So my question's not directed to you specifically, but to the entity CenterPoint that is responsible for keeping the lights on for Houstonians. First, the hotline that residents are supposed to call. I've been getting reports that has been crashing or down, and we've had several residents reaching out with sparked live wires. I saw pictures. I haven't been able to verify it. One resident's tree caught on fire. The fire department continues to go out to put those fires out, but they're trying to get CenterPoint out. Obviously, when we learn of it, I have direct communication, but can you give us a status on whether or not CenterPoint's call lines are working?
To my knowledge, they are working. I know that they are inundated with a lot of calls because this has completely covered our entire system for the greater metro area. I'm not aware of them actually crashing. I can go and confirm and see if I can learn more, but from what I understand, that we are still taking those calls, and we're asking everybody, when you see those down power lines, to call 713-207-2222.
Okay, thank you. And do we have an estimate on how much the derecho cost from CenterPoint's perspective?
I believe some of the things that we're still looking for is following up on the invoices, but it is in the exceeding the many, many millions.
Okay. Yeah. And do we have an estimate, just in these few days, of how much this disaster is costing?
Not until we get a complete idea of what our assessments are. Unfortunately, the way that it works is we have to put eyes on exactly what we have. And going back to that auto analogy, when you get into a vehicle accident, some things might look like it might be a quick fix, but until you take it to mechanic and he looks under the hood, you don't really know. And that's where we are. We're hoping to have that mechanic look at everything, so to speak, by the end of today, and then we'll get an idea.
Great. And those costs, I'm assuming, are passed on to consumers, so the everyday residents, or how does that cost structure work?
Yeah, that is typically how that works. What we're looking at is this would probably be in the hundreds of millions. What we've done in the past is securitize bonds to go and request. That way we have the funds necessary to be able to stay up and operating, and then that bond is passed on as a line item bill for our residential customers. And
the reason I'm asking that is we talk a lot about, it'll cost too much to bury lines, or it's a cost, but at what point do we get to the place where the cost of every time the power is going out and a resident has to throw out their groceries or buy a generator, all of those costs, and it's hot out, right? This is now a life safety concern. So when we say everything we can do to get the lights back on, in my opinion and respectfully, they should be on. I understand that we had a hurricane, but this was a Category 1. Ike was close to 16. It's been 15 years since Ike. We know that the severe weather, the extreme weather due to climate change is real, it's happening, and we've known for some time. So I understand that we're now CenterPoint's submitting resiliency plans, but going even back to the derecho, when a pole was down, that was replaced. But was there an assessment done of which poles had been weakened from the wind? And was there an attempt to replace those poles?
So specifically to that question, we have a pole inspection program where we go and we do that annually. Part of our resiliency program is to increase that even more. But I wanted to highlight another question that she had regarding the costs associated with a storm. And with the resiliency proposal that we have, it's, I believe, over the next 3 years, $2.2 billion. And one of the things that we're able to demonstrate, to her point, was the impact of the economic community. When you have one of the largest ports in the country, how that affects the community, the energy capital of the world that we have here locally, how all of those things are impacted, how that drives a socioeconomic level, and that the investment actually will pay for itself. We were recommending to do things such as manufactured poles, which are stronger, more resilient. They're a little bit more expensive. But the goal is, if we have more of those, what we're doing is rehabbing our facilities instead of rebuilding. And so if those poles stay up, we can put wire up really, really fast. But when we have storms such as this, with the trees completely coming down from the ground, taking out our lines and our poles, that's where all the time comes in to do the restoration work. And so our goal and what we were able to demonstrate was how you can look at the things such as strategic undergrounding, whether the things that we could do to replace our aging infrastructure, identifying the critical circuits where all of these questions are about our necessities are to make those circuits more resilient. How can we help with the modernization to make it more quick and efficient? All of those things will pay for itself.
And I agree with the economic impact. We have businesses that can't operate right now. That's families that need to pay their own bills. But you referenced earlier legislation and working at the state level, and I appreciate you working at the state level, but CenterPoint and others pushed legislation to take away the ability and the power of localities to regulate utilities. Is CenterPoint now willing to go back to the table to make sure that localities can, it's not a one-size-fits-all, but that we as Houston can actually have a say in how we regulate and harden that infrastructure?
Well, the way that I believe that we see it is that we still have a partnership with the city, regardless of jurisdiction. And we're committed to work with the city regardless of the original jurisdiction or not. We feel that on behalf of the ratepayers, there are efficiencies that to be gained when everything goes before the Public Utility Commission. And it's not an issue about what rights the city has about regulating, because from my perspective, the city has the opportunity to intervene and do everything that they need necessarily to make their point, regardless of whether they take original jurisdiction. So it's really not an issue of that partnership that we have. For us to be successful, I can tell you that we see exactly the results that we're having because of the collaboration we have with the Office of Emergency Management, the Public Works Department, and that can never go away for us to be effective. We recognize that, we appreciate it, and we fully support that.
I understand, but again, we're talking about how CenterPoint stood up resources before the storm, but we should have never been in this place to begin with a Category 1 seeing the widespread outages that we are. Or it could have been, like we're past the time of saying that this wasn't predictable. And I appreciate everything that you're providing today, but I would like to make sure that, Mayor, we are having further discussions about what CenterPoint is doing to make sure that this does not happen again and how long that's going to take because, again, we've lost 3 individuals through the storm, but with this heat, that number can rise. And we have seen this time and time and time again now. So look forward to more conversations, but for Houstonians that are sitting in their homes right now, this is not acceptable.
Understood, and I'd love to be able to sit down and share exactly what we're looking at on our resiliency filing so you can have at least an understanding of that as well.
Councilmember Huffman.
Thank you, Mayor. And talking about that resiliency piece, I'd like to see CenterPoint be a little bit more aggressive about the tree trimming around the power lines. This problem is, it's way too big to report every single, instance. But is there an aggressive tree trimming initiative that CenterPoint's doing, or is that something that CenterPoint can commit to?
Well, we are spending millions of dollars on our existing tree trimming process that we have, and it is based on a reliability program on how circuits are performing. But that is a day-to-day blue sky type. What we would like to do moving forward is look at it from a resiliency perspective, which would give us a more robust and aggressive tree trimming approach. We want to go ahead and identify, where we know where these critical customers are, that you are working with us to get the power restored quickly as possible. We want to make sure that we can go and put those on a 3-year cycle so that we can make sure that those are constantly maintained, because we want to identify what we refer to as relay-free circuits, where we're not able to have the modernization and switching necessary to get those. So yes, we do think that it's important to be able to look at it, especially from the resiliency perspective, to do something more robust than what we're doing now.
Thank you. And has CenterPoint, have they permanently removed the outage tracker map from the website, or will that come back at some point?
So unfortunately, we had a lot of issues during derecho. What we experienced was basically capacity restraints from all the people gaining access. What we had not anticipated was the number of robots and third-party companies basically just setting constant pings to our facility, and it caused our outage tracker to crash. We've worked with our IT departments to try to rehabilitate it. We had some, I thought, what was going to be optimistic results from it, and when they weren't working, we had other options to try to resolve it. Unfortunately, none of them were able to work, and from our perspective, what we were able to deem was that our outage tracker, because how it had crashed, was unsalvageable. So even prior to the storm, we'd worked with another third party to build a cloud-based platform to have one, hopefully before we see any hurricanes, which we have come August or September. Our goal is to have that up and running by the end of this month. It's extremely unfortunate the timing that we've had, that we've experienced something when we don't have it out. And we are extremely disappointed ourselves that we don't have it. We know the frustration. We're doing what we can to try to get the information as best as we can. We understand that it's not as good as it could be, or probably as it should be, but we are trying. We solicit feedback for any way that we can to help get the message out, and we sincerely apologize for what we're having to go through without not having that outage tracker.
And I know, it's something that the constituents would like to see, and what we're hearing on our end is that it seems like it's hard to, speak with a live person, and I know that, y'all are busy, to speak with a live person over the phone, or even difficult just to report an outage. Is that something that CenterPoint's working on?
We are. And again, we want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable call those lines, and I can verify if we were having some issues. And we'll see what we can find out, but I apologize if that's some of the feedback that you're hearing.
Also, I had a constituent reach out yesterday that said they had gotten an alert on their phone that their power had been restored. And in fact, their power hadn't been restored. It was kind of the same situation during derecho. They'd gotten an alert saying it was restored. It wasn't. What happens? I know they re-report that they don't have power, but their concern was because they were without power for so long during derecho that, once it shows, I guess, on your end that power is restored, then they go to the bottom of the list. And so, so what happens if, they get an alert saying power's been restored, but it's not, they report it? Do they go to the bottom of the list? How does that?
Yeah, there's no bottom of the list, so to speak. And what we're looking at is it's a very specific process on a restoration effort, very similar to what we did during derecho. Well, first we have to start with our substations because that's where all the power is coming from. And then, as I used the analogy before, that extension cord, we have to make the repairs as they go down. Unfortunately, at times when we're restoring some of the sections of the line, there could be other things like trees on branches and other areas where the fuses didn't go off the first time so that it can have temporary power. But there are also times when we have new outages that are created because branches that were just dangling ready to fall that were damaged from the storm finally do fall. But what happens is it goes into our queue where we recognize it right away and we try to address it with, is it a circuit outage? We try to make all of our circuits back up, which is our backbone. Then we address our laterals and then we address our fuses. Because what we're looking at is if I get one circuit back up and running, we have thousands of customers restored. It doesn't make sense for me to work on just a lateral that has a couple hundred customers that are on it, unfortunately. And of those that are on laterals, it's unfortunate that they have to wait, but we want to be able to get that whole circuit up and running. Then we can reach those laterals. And then once those laterals are on, then you'll find transformers, which is 3 to 5 customers per transformer that could be effective. So that line could be energized, but their transformer could be out. We're not going to start addressing the transformers until we get the circuits on, the laterals on, then we focus on the transformers.
And so I hear what you're saying, and I know that there is no list, but are assisted living facilities, do they get higher priority, or is it the same sort of thing, that you've got to do the circuit and the laterals and...
So what we do as part of our preparation process, we work with the city to recognize all critical customers. And part of the reason why we have somebody with Office of Emergency Management is so when those are brought up that we may or may not be aware of, we can make sure that they're escalated, we address them accordingly. We do have a list of a lot, but that list is exactly dependent upon what we get from the city of Houston. And we try to review that on an annual basis prior to hurricane season to make sure that we can know exactly what they are, we have in our database, and we can respond the best way that we can.
Because currently in District G, there are at least 2 of assisted living facilities that don't have power, the Buckingham and Eagles Trace. So just putting that on your radar. Thank you.
I appreciate it. And we are doing everything that we can, and part of it is just a direct reflection to the amount of damage prior upstream of them. And I will share, we are in every area that we're working on. We don't segregate between one neighborhood or another. But it's also important to know that because when we do it from a sequence, these circuits go through several communities, not just one. So we could be specifically working to restore your power, but we might not be in your neighborhood. We could be doing everything we can to get your power back on, but you might not see the trucks. But please rest assured, we are there trying to get it back on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Martinez.
Thank you, Mayor. Brad, thank you for being here and sharing some more information. I really want to kind of dig a little bit deeper into the vegetation management. You mentioned that you are looking at priority areas, but what we're seeing is in the residential area where you don't maintain as much, and I don't know if it's because folks aren't calling you all or it's just too much work, but how are y'all going to start prioritizing residential areas specifically when it comes to vegetation management? Because that's where we're starting to see a lot of these, where you're not able to go into neighborhoods to fix or get power back on because these tree limbs are, people's backyards. And so just want to see what that looks like.
Yeah, so currently the way the system works is it's based on performance. Those circuits are performing. We prioritize them based on tree issues that they have, and that determines their trim cycle. And so what we're looking at is when we can identify circuits that have a large number of critical customers, we don't want to do it based on performance anymore. We want to identify those specific circuits, and we want to put them on a constant trim, make sure they're always trimmed. We feel like we could do that on a 3-year cycle. We'll still increase the amount of trimming that we do in the residential areas because that money that we would do before that would for the additional trimming would be above and beyond what we're already doing. And so that would increase the amount of trimming that we have in the residential neighborhoods as well.
And what does it look like if I were to pick up the phone and say, hey, I need you to come and trim my tree? Is that part of that cycle, or how does that work? Even
Yes,
though you might have.
we do that regularly. We do it a few ways. When customers come out, we always ask our customers to notify. If you feel like we have tree issues, we send people to go out and look at it, and we do the trimming, but we do it specifically for that location. And that's different. We call that reactive tree trimming, and that is part of our program that we do, and we will continue to do that. That'll never change. What I'm talking about specifically is a proactive cycle trimming that we do, which is in addition to that.
And then lastly, I was a little bit confused, so if you can just run through the timeline as quickly as possible. You mentioned you began boots on the ground today.
I'm sorry?
Boots on the ground today. I took a little note when you said that. I'm not sure. Again, I might be confused on the timeline, but
Sure.
And Councilor Pollard was mentioning, when is response kicking in? Understanding that, as Cayman mentioned, it's Category 1. Should folks have already been here this weekend, Friday, staging at least, preparing? What is that timeline? What did that timeline look like coming in?
Yeah, so we did have resources on the way prior to the storm. As I had shared before, I was actually with the Office of Emergency Management Sunday going through their preparation call, defining all the things that we've done on preparation. Our boots on the ground started as soon as the storm cleared our system, which is approximately 3 p.m. Those are internal resources. They're doing everything to begin our specified restoration process. While that's taking place, our logistic folks are going out to the staging sites, getting everything ready for the mutual assistance crews. Those that were on their way, they ride out the storm safely in a place that is going to be outside of the storm so that they can come in and respond as quickly and efficiently as possible. We would never ask these third-party utilities, contractors, municipalities to ride out the storm because it's not safe. We ask you to get as close as possible so that you can respond as efficiently as practical, and then we go from there. And as I had shared, in my 26 years of experience, I have never been able to see a staging site for thousands and thousands of linemen up and ready within 14 hours. I mean, if I was going to put it in perspective, when you look at the freedom of, over Texas that we just observed, you look at all the preparation necessary to put that event, which I was there, by the way, you guys did a great job. Imagine getting a phone call that says by 3 o'clock, you got to have that up and running, doors open for the public by 5 a.m. And that's exactly what we did. We had 8 staging sites up, and as of 5 a.m. this morning, we have 8 more. It's a total of 16 staging sites. We have secured 12,000 field resources to do the necessary work we need to. And again, what I wanted to emphasize is over 1 million customers restored within 48 hours. To me, I think that's a monumental number right there to think about what we're able to do. Because as I mentioned, Nicholas, that was 700,000 plus customers. That was 5 days.
And I'll just end with this. You mentioned legislation at the state level, and I know that the mayor is already on it as well, but we really need to focus on what the state can do, right, to be able to figure out how infrastructure resiliency can be a priority here in Houston, because we're only barely in July, and we're going to see more storms for sure. So thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Pro Tem Peck.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for being here. My questions were mostly answered. They were related to the phone number and the power alert service. But to Councilmember Huffman's point about people getting messages that their power was on when it's actually off, we had kind of the opposite problem last night in Spring Branch, that we had another storm roll through, and many of the people who finally got power back yesterday lost their power from that storm. And to my knowledge, nobody got any kind of alerts. That was the frustration that I kept hearing from certainly everyone in my neighborhood, but all throughout Spring Branch, I kept getting comments of, do they even know that our power is out? And I think that's half of the frustration there, is that, when we don't get that, we sign up for these alerts and we don't get those alerts. And there's kind of a panic there of, do they even know that our power is off? And so just wanted to mention that, because as we're looking at how to fix things in the future, that we really need to make sure that that power alert service is working, so that at least people know when their power goes off that CenterPoint is aware. And I think that people at least are, they're not happy that the power's out, but they're happy at least that CenterPoint knows about it and that they're on, track to getting it fixed.
Thank you, Councilmember Peck. I appreciate the feedback. I will take that back, and I will tell you that we agree with that. We were hoping our power alert service would be helpful with the lack of our outage tracker, but it sounds like there's still room for opportunities. It is complicated when you have a scale outage as we do, with things being on, things being off. We're still going to occur as storms come through while we're doing this restoration effort, that there's going to be some outages potentially. Things still happen, cars still run into poles. It's a part of it, and I will take that feedback and make sure that we'll see what we can do to try to address that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Davis.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for coming in for your presentation of information. Just have a few questions I want to ask, particularly on the question of preparation that you spoke of. And you have 56,000 miles of circuits, right? So one of the things you also mentioned, that the cost, you're working on modernizing the grids, correct? That's going to be a cost. And I think you quoted some $2 billion, right in that, right? So that would go to the customer, correct?
Correct.
So as council, we would be responsible in regards to price increases and other things from CenterPoint, right? So being that the citizens is your customer, which mean we would have to speak on their behalf or consider this on their behalf. And so in preparation to assure the customer, because the frustration is, that's why many of the councilmen ask about preparation, the response to calls. So my question is, what is the setup now from a technological perspective? You have grids all over the city, correct? So do you have a team that's designated to a certain area based upon where the grids are? Is that how CenterPoint set up? Even before the ask of vendors coming in, do you have a team by locations across the city?
Well, we have service centers that are strategically located to respond as necessary, and we have our staging sites dispersed throughout, so that when we have our external resources, that we could maximize the coverage and work as quickly, as efficiently as possible. Now, as far as modernizing the grid, we've actually started doing that. It's several years now where we're actually gone back and started doing hardening of our facilities. We've been reporting to the Texas Public Utility Commission our storm hardening program, but unfortunately that takes time, and we have infrastructure that's tens of decades old that we need to address if we want to make this more resilient, because we need to get there sooner than later. We've done some of those things to do the modernization. We want to do more. We want to be able to address those things. We want to talk about and have the conversations, and we've had these conversations with the City of Houston, their outside counsel, about the resiliency plan, why we think it's necessary, what the costs are going to be, why it's a benefit to the ratepayers. We understand the costs that's associated with it up front, but when you see these events like we have, I think I heard somebody say the third one in 2 months, those investments actually do pay for themselves.
So does that mean then that those areas that you have to do that is not adequate?
I don't understand the question.
In other words, those areas that you spoke of, some of the technological and other resources that you need right now is not adequate to meet the need. Is that?
So we have a system that we built for over 100 years, and we started the Intelligent Grid program in 2010-ish. And so for us to be able to do that and have that dispersed across our 5,000 square foot territory, we have to figure out where it makes the most sense to make our system more modern as possible. There are other things to maximize that. We have to do some substation upgrades, which we call digital substations, to allow us to have more functionality for times like this, to be able to make intelligent grid decisions and responses. But it's something that we're able to do slowly over time. this resiliency program where we recognize the benefits of that investment and how we want to be able to do that all over.
The response time.
Yeah.
Councilman Alcorn?
Thank you, Brad. Most people just want to know when their power is going to be back on. Can you tell me how many Houston customers are still without power? Do you have an updated number on that?
Yes, so it's always a moving target, but
Sure.
I believe as of around 9 a.m. this morning, it was 560,000 customers.
560,000. And with the lack of the outage tracker, kind of knowing when it's going to come, I mean, is there like, are you guys saying by X everybody should be restored? And I know it's scary to say that, but
Well, the issue really is to get an actual idea of what we have.
Sure.
And for us to be able to do that, again, we have to have somebody physically walking the entire
Right.
circuit. And as there's debris on the ground, that's going to slow them down. A lot of our circuits are in backyards where they're blocked by fences, and so that takes time. And so for us to have full confidence as to what we're looking at, we need to have all of that information in. And we understand it's frustrating. It's just as frustrating for us because we want to get an idea exactly what we need. But until we have all that information, it's really hard for us to just say.
right. And so is there a time frame by which you'll have that information that you need in order to make that call?
We're hoping by the end of tonight.
By the end of tonight, you'll have the assessments done, so then residents still without power can find out, like, it's going to be X number of days at the latest.
We'll probably do it from a global perspective
Okay.
of what we're looking at, and
Okay.
then try to start working something with our IT folks to see what we can do to demonstrate it on a more localized level the best that we can.
Okay, great. And I can't reiterate enough what other people have mentioned, the down lines numbers. I mean, people waited for hours, and it was dangerous, and so that needs to really be improved. But thanks so much for all you're doing.
Thank you.
Councilman Ramirez?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for being here and taking hard questions. I'm one of those 560,000 Houston residents without power, going on 54 hours now. So I'm not a happy camper, especially since I went through this 4 or 5 days just a few weeks ago with derecho. And I don't fault you guys for not asking thousands of workers to come into Houston before the storm hit, ride out the hurricane with us so they'd be ready to go when the storm left. I know these things are inherently unpredictable, although we think, we understand them now. We really don't. I don't fault you guys for the outage tracker, because the outage tracker isn't going to help me get my power restored, right? So I'm looking for CenterPoint to start doing things that will prevent this from happening again. And we can talk about vegetation management, which I know is necessary, since all of our lines are above ground. But even that's not a cure, so to speak. I've got one tree down in my backyard that wasn't contacting the power lines before, but it fell in such a way that now one of the branches is on the power line, and we can't do anything about it until CenterPoint comes out and gets it off the line. And I'm sure that's the case with thousands of other Houstonians. And so, seeing as how you guys have been in the power business for 100 years, and I know there are some obstacles to it, but I'm wondering why CenterPoint hasn't started decades ago the process of burying underground as many of these power lines as we could, so that we wouldn't have 2 million people without power.
Well, actually, our standard for new construction has been that way for decades. The challenge that we have, because we've been serving Houston for over 100 years, we have facilities, infrastructure easements that have been above ground for a long, long time. And to go back and try to put those facilities underground in somebody's backyard where everything's been built up, they have their pools, they have their landscaping, it's monumental as far as what the costs are. And I can tell you that, though, for wind, that undergrounding facilities does make a difference. It's not always the answer for everything, because here in the city of Houston we have flooding issues. And we had issues with our major underground facilities, the circuits that we have that we deem to be the most reliable. We're having issues with this storm. So it's not a catch-all. We do agree that strategically there are opportunities to underground, and we've done the analysis of what the costs are, and we can show you about what makes sense and why it makes sense to where to do it, where it could help save benefits for the ratepayer in that investment. But I think we have to be strategic with it. We have to look at how and where that makes sense, the best way to make it as effective as possible. And again, we can't make sure that we're 100% hurricane proof, but we can do things maybe instead of a 3-week process, we can get it down to 15 days, that kind of thing. So we want to make sure that we can do everything that we can to get the restoration effort as done quickly as possible.
Well, I think we should pursue it in those areas where it is feasible. I understand there are areas where you can't do it, but to the extent we don't have to worry about trees falling on power lines because we can't get rid of the trees. That would completely change the character of the city. You have 50, 60-foot tall trees, they're going to fall on some power lines. There's just nothing you can do about it. But if the lines, as many of them as we could, were below ground, I think that would help. And so I hope CenterPoint gets serious about doing that in the future.
We are. And to that point, all of our new construction is underground for our residential. And so to that point, we have been doing that for decades.
Thank you, Councilor Evans-Shabazz.
Thank you, Mayor. First and foremost, when you make the motion to have this meeting extended past noon, we need to vote that down. But at any rate, let me move forward. I want to read a text that I got at 8:47 last night. It says, at 7:30, I contacted CenterPoint, and my sister's neighbor contacted the fire department, loose wire and sparks. The fire department came and said there was nothing they could do and left. Her home is burning to the ground right now, and now there are 4 trucks. How should that have been handled?
If you could send me that address, I'll look into it. I would like to understand exactly the full detail of everything that happened.
I'll do that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I'm sorry for hearing that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember, I got the same text about the time you did, and we're still trying to get the rest of the information. I just feel like because they are saying CenterPoint didn't respond, the fire department didn't respond, and there's multiple parties involved, so we're trying to gather the data to see what truly. Ma'am?
The motion
Microphone.
to extend past noon.
Oh, Lord, yes.
Could we vote that down?
So we do have a motion in a second.
We're the only one in Houston that has to ask permission to keep working on important matters. The motion's been made and seconded. All in favor of allowing us to work past noon? All in favor say yes. Those opposed? That includes you too, Brad.
Can I say nay? No, I'm just kidding.
Evan Shabazz votes no.
It's in the affirmative. Thank you, Councilmember.
Councilmember Carter.
Councilmember Carter.
Well, thank you, Brad, for being here. And I know you've got your hands full, and we really do appreciate all you're doing. And as many have said, everybody just wants their power on. Up in Kingwood, we've got a significant, we've got trees. You know the situation. This morning, as I came up Kingwood Drive, I thought, okay, what's going to happen when the rest of the trees that are just teetering start to fall? Mm-hmm. And that, the immediate situation is certainly dire at best in some areas. But my concern is, as we move forward, there's a whole new ball game out there that's about to happen. And it's about to start because, it's a dangerous situation. And, will your crews will they continue to not just clean up the down trees, but also those that are leaning and just swift cleanups?
Well, typically what our response is, we have vegetation management crews that go out, and if they see something that they recognize as a potential hazard, we have to get with a homeowner and try to coordinate that. Sometimes it's a challenge because they may not be home, but we try not to do that without letting them directly involved, but if we guarantee or deem that it's a necessary hazard that has to be addressed, there are times when we just go ahead and do that. But our preference is to try to coordinate with the homeowner, let them know what they're looking at so they understand that we're just not trying to destroy their yard.
Well, we certainly appreciate all you do, and I don't think they've made it up that way yet, but I'm sure they're on their way. The other thing is I'd like to invite you, and we'll reach out to present your resiliency plan at the Resilience Committee in the near future, and let's, invite people to come out and listen and provide some input and just feedback. So
I'd
we'll be
appreciate
back in
that.
touch.
Thank you.
Shortly.
Councilor Kamen.
Thank you, Mayor. I did want to recognize we also have in the audience Nick representing Comcast, and I know we had some widespread outages last night, but y'all got things up and running very quickly through national, so thank y'all. And Verizon, Mayor, is waiving data usage for all customers from the 8th through the 17th. So I want to ask for CenterPoint, are y'all considering any discount or support for people that are going through what they're going through right now?
Well, basically the way that we operate is that it's basically the usage on the meter. And obviously customers aren't using any electricity when they're out. We can certainly look at what programs we have to work with customers if they're having issues because they have to utilize their funds to do home repairs, fence repairs, roof repairs, those kind of things. We can certainly get with our folks, see what we can do to help with those programs to reach out, whether it's LAHEAP or other programs to help with utility bills.
That would be terrific. And then just going back to what I had asked about with Ike, because that's the most comparable wind event that we can compare this to. And my question is about what has been improved. And you're referencing the resiliency plan, which that's great, let's do it. But my understanding is most, if not all of that could have already been implemented through the DCRF that's been in place for years. DCRF is the distribution on cost recovery factor. And I'm reading my notes because I want to get this right. I believe it's an expedited rate mechanism that allows utilities to recover costs for infrastructure in a short term outside of a regular rate case. So it was created to incentivize infrastructure investments, not having to have y'all wait to recover on that investment. So was any of that, can you speak to that?
We'll still continue to utilize that vehicle. The resiliency program that we're asking to do will still utilize that vehicle. But understand that everything that we do has to have a prudency review. And we have been making resiliency upgrades for several years now. And we've been able to recover that either through a rate-based proceeding or a DCRF. But for us to be able to do it at a completely different level in which we haven't looked at things, for example, the vegetation management, we want to do it from a resiliency perspective, which historically we've not been allowed to do. And for us to be able to do that, we needed legislation to support that. And that actually, we got that legislation last summer. And then that allowed the Texas Public Utility Commission, who also agrees that there's a need to do this, to provide a rule for the utilities to put these resiliency programs together. So really, in a sense, we've been supportive of the resiliency program. We helped with the legislation to get that approved, and fortunately that was able to happen. And that will allow us to do it at a greater scale than what we've been able to do.
Very good. Thank you, Brad, for being here. I think going forward, communication and transparency is essential. It's sometimes the lack of information causes so much frustration. So thank you, be safe, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council.